Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. We are pleased to present Shelf Isolation, a weekly mini-series about books, culture, and what to read next. I'm Sarah Marie, and this is your Information and Reader Services Department. In this episode, we are excited to share with you what we have been reading, watching, and or listening to during Shelf Isolation. To begin our mini-series, I'm going to turn things over to Readers Roundtable expert and moderator, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah Marie. So the first thing that I've read this week is a graphic novel called Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Promise. So this is a 3-part graphic novel series that takes place right after the show. So if you have not seen the show, mute me right now because I'm going to be talking about some spoilers. So it starts with the unfinished conversation between Zuko and Ozai, who's his father, about the whereabouts of Zuko's mother. But it ends up taking a different turn than he thought, and he questions what happened to her. So after that conversation with his father, Zuko forces Aang, the Avatar, to promise to kill him if he becomes like his father. So there is negotiations with the Earth King about the Harmony Restoration Movement. It's a movement to move people from the Fire Nation out of colonies and bring them back to the Fire Nation. But it turns out many of the older colonies, the Fire Nation people have integrated with the other people and intermarrying, and that causes problems. So Fire Lord Zuko is caught between his desires of his people and the demands to bring peace and balance. Only that can be obtained by the Fire Nation people going back to their own kingdom. So then, of course, there's a showdown, and Aang, of course, has to figure things out, and he may have to follow through with his promise to kill Zuko because he is going on the wrong path. So I thought this was an excellent continuation of the show. It had the same feelings. The art is really great. All the characterization, it was really funny. So if you loved the Avatar: The Last Airbender show, I highly recommend that you pick up this series and many of the other graphic novel series that are available. And you can come back if you haven't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I'm going to talk about something else. So secondly, I just finished a book called Come Tumbling Down, which is the 5th book in Seanan McGuire's Wayward Children series. I can't really talk about what happened without giving away the plot, but this is the story of Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children. It's a boarding school for kids who have come home from portal fantasy worlds, and they kind of adjust to being back in the real world. These are slim but well-written, creepy, and full of characters that you'll love, and you'll definitely want to check it out. You'll want to start with Every Heart is a Doorway. And that's actually all I have to talk about, so I'm going to hand it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, I actually have very exciting news, and I'm going to share my screen because after almost a couple years now of work, so now that the State Library is back from the pandemic and back in the office, they are publishing our digitized items from the grant. So as you can see online through the Illinois Digital Archive and soon the Digital Library of America, we have programs and images that are now available online through the IDA, which is idaarchives.org. So if you look though, go through, you see there's programs from 1920, and you could actually look to see what program was today in and it's kind of, there's still some glitches. The system's changed a little bit, so you have to click it on and click it on and click it on, then open it up. And I already have it open, but you could open up the 1920 program from Ravinia. And on this day, there were actually several concerts at Ravinia, including children's programs in the afternoon and AIDA in the evening. So that's really fun, good thing. Some of these programs have been available not in the format they are now and not online in a group from Ravinia. So it's kind of fun to look at. There's a lot of interesting issues with opera because a few months ago I got my alumni magazine, and one of the professors was talking about opera and race, and if you see, they didn't pay attention to that in the 1920s. For example, Aida, which takes place in Egypt and Ethiopia, has starring Florence Eastman and Mary Kent, famous opera stars. And 2 days earlier, you had Lucia de Lammermoor, a Scottish heroine being played by a very famous Mexican opera singer. So there's some issues that can be studied further now if these programs are available. And I think there's some very interesting stories here. So I will hand this over to Jacki. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. So this week, I'd like to talk about the book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is a true crime story, and the subtitle is One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer. And Michelle was an amateur investigator, and she developed a website called the True Crime Diary. She's obsessed with true crime and murder and all this, and she became obsessed when she was a young girl in Oak Park, Illinois, her hometown. And she heard about a young woman that was murdered. So she wanted to know what happened and what was going on. So this became her obsession as an adult. And she decided to investigate the Golden State Killer, who she helped name. And it's a very interesting book because it goes through her investigation and what she found and all her contact with the police in all these various cities that the Golden State Killer committed a sexual assault and also murders. So over a course of 10 years, he was accused of 50 sexual assaults in Northern California and then 10 murders in Southern California. And then he pretty much disappeared in 1986. So this is Michelle's story of how she became obsessed with the case and her investigation and everything. Now, unfortunately, Michelle actually passed away during the course of writing this book, and it was finished by her lead investigator, Paul Haynes, and an investigative journalist, Billy Jensen. It's just an excellent book, and if you're looking for something that, as a mystery reader, you may want to find this because it's a very interesting book. There is a HBO series, TV documentary series on I'll Be Gone in the Dark right now. And if you're doing our summer reading program, we do have a square for true crime category. This would be a perfect book for that. It is available on an ebook and e-audiobook in both Libby and Hoopla. So it's really available. And after kind of rereading that book, I wanted something very light to read. You know, coming back to work in the building and having people in, it's been very tiring. So I went to the new book stack and found the book California Girls by Susan Mallery. And Susan Mallery writes some really interesting family, romantic women stories. And this is a very interesting book because it's about three sisters who, in a very short period of time, all get dumped by their significant others. So Finola, I think it's how you say her name, is a very popular LA morning TV show host. She's married to Neil, who is a plastic surgeon. And when she's preparing for her show on a Thursday morning, the day before they plan on leaving for Hawaii and having a nice vacation, and she is ready to tell him she wants to have a baby, he comes to her right before the show and says he's having an affair and he's leaving her. And not only did this happen, but she has on the show that booked that morning this hot young country singer named Treasure. And Treasure comes to her right before the show starts and said, I'm having an affair with your husband and your old husband. So there she has to do her show being hit by these things, and she doesn't know what Treasure's going to say. So Fiona has to, work through this herself. The second daughter is Jeannie, who is an OR nurse who primarily works for heart surgeons. She's been casually dating Clark, and he's much more into her than she's into him. And he tells her that and says bye. But then she also has a best friend. His name is Bernie. She's been through cancer treatment. And Bernie and her husband would like to have a baby. And so they asked Jeannie to be their surrogate. And of course, she says yes. So Jeannie has to deal with that. The third daughter is Allie. And she is going to marry Glenn in 7 weeks. Her wedding dress has been purchased. The invitations have gone out. She comes home that Thursday night, and Daniel, Glenn's brother, is standing there at her apartment door, and she's not quite sure why he's there. She didn't have much of a relationship with Daniel during this entire time, but Daniel tells her that Glenn doesn't want to get married, and Glenn's plan was just not to show up at the wedding, but Daniel didn't think he should do that. So this is Allie dealing with that. So the family dynamics is kind of interesting. Mom and Dad are divorced. Dad is off on a sailboat with his second wife, and he basically sends unhelpful texts to the girls during all this. Mom, who really wants grandbabies, is really upset with Jeannie, but she still wants grandbabies. But mom is also downsizing in her house that they've lived in for over 30 years. So she has the girls coming over to help. So of course, they come across all these various memories and things. So it's a very delightful, light read. I haven't quite finished it yet, so I'm not sure exactly what happens with all this stuff, but it's very interesting. So we've got the book. The ebook is available on Libby. The audiobook is available on Hoopla. If you want something really you'd like to read, almost any of Susan Mallery books will do you for a summer read. So that's pretty much all I have today, and I'm going to turn this over to Karen.
Thanks, Jacki. That's kind of a hard act to follow today, but I'll try. So anyway, I mentioned The Journey Home by Olafsson last week. I had started it, and I was hoping it was going to be the kind of Olafsson book that I like. And it was, I'd say. It takes place mainly in England, where there's an Icelandic character who moved to England in 1936. The time period is kind of murky. We don't know if it's the 60s or the 50s. I think it's around that time, because I'm guessing she'd been in England about 20 years when she's diagnosed with a terminal illness. She's been running a country hotel for a long time in England, and decides to make one last trip back home to Iceland. And we don't know quite why. It makes sense, that's where she grew up. But she doesn't tell anybody about the illness, as far as I can tell, but she just plans this trip. It takes at least a week, and on the trip, she has old letters to reread, and she's thinking back and recalling some of her greatest regrets. Times when she said, if only I hadn't done that, or if only I hadn't said that, things would have turned out differently. But, she just kind of runs through these, and then when she arrives, we find out the purpose of her trip, only in the last few pages, and it's a surprise, kind of a twist, so I don't want to say why she went. But this I would recommend, but I would recommend his book, Restoration, as the first one you should read if you want to try these books by him. So the book I started this week was called The Snack Thief. It's the third in the series by Andrea Camilleri about Inspector Montalbano in Sicily. And this was kind of similar to the previous book in that a crime is committed in the beginning. And in this case, it's a murder man in an elevator of an apartment building. The inspector begins to investigate, and he starts to interview some very interesting and amusing suspects. And then all of a sudden, you're a third of the way through, and another crime comes to light, seemingly unrelated to the first. And the second crime is reported, I think, by people at a school, or mothers. They say a 5-year-old has been attacking kids on their way to school and stealing their what they call late morning snacks. They're maybe something like our lunches. But in the notes at the back of the book, they explain that a late morning snack is something mothers pack for kids to take to school because lunch is not served till at least 1 or 1:30. So anyway, this little boy is attacking other kids and stealing their lunches. And so on a hunch, Inspector Montalbano decides to set up a stakeout. He has a theory about why this is happening and who the boy might be. So they catch the boy in the act, I guess. And this is going to set into motion a whole new investigation, I guess. This is about where I am right now, where they've caught the boy and they're trying to figure out his connection to the first crime. So this is moving very quickly. I guess I'm getting used to the style, used to the Italian setting, and these have been really good. I'm glad there are, I think, about 20 more to come. So I don't really have specific plans for reading except to finish that and maybe start a new book. So that's all from me, and next we will hear from Sarah.
Thanks, Karen. I will start with another recommendation from my toddler. This is a series he's been enjoying recently. Little P, Little Hoot, and Little Oink by Amy Cross Rosenthal. They're adorable. We had Little P already, and he'd been really liking it, so I got the other two from the library. But they're all about kids who don't want to do what their parents tell them to. So Little P doesn't want to have to eat his candy. He just wants to eat vegetables. Little Hoot doesn't want to stay up late like owls have to do. He wants to go to bed. And Little Oink doesn't want to make messes. He likes cleaning. So they're adorable, very punny. And I actually think that they'd be better for like preschool age kids. I don't think my toddler really understands the humor, but he likes the illustrations and has now learned to say yuck and yum from this book, although he says them interchangeably. He eats food he likes and keeps saying yuck. So these are a lot of fun, great for older toddlers, but little ones enjoyed them too. And then what I've been reading, I finished listening to The Last Train to Key West by Chanel Clayton. This is part of her series. There are 3 books in the series. The first one is Next Year in Havana. The second one is When We Left Cuba. And then this is the third one. I actually haven't read the second one yet because I accidentally read them out of order, which means they do not have to be read in order. They're about sisters from Cuba who immigrate to the US after the Cuban Revolution. And this one, The Last Train to Key West, is the story of 3 different women. One of them is the sister of the girls from the other book, who are all in the Florida Keys during the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. And all 3 are sort of in different circumstances in their relationships. One is in an abusive marriage. Another is trying to find her brother, who is in a veterans camp and missing. And then the third is the sister, who's just married to a man who seems to be somehow involved in the mob. But it was really interesting, really fast-paced. All of the action happens within a couple of days because it's all during the storm, and I definitely recommend it. And then my third thing this week is something I've been watching, which is the TV show My Life is Murder. It is available through the library on DVD or on Hoopla. It's an Australian series starring Lucy Lawless, who most of us probably best know as Xena, Warrior Princess. But at this point, she's playing a retired police detective who her former police colleagues keep giving her folders under the table and saying, hey, can you solve this? And she always says, oh, no, I don't want to do it, and then ends up getting involved and doing it anyway. It's set in Melbourne, Australia, and the scenery is gorgeous. That's probably my favorite thing about it, is just getting to see parts of Australia. But it's light and funny for a mystery, and I really enjoyed it. It's 10 episodes long, so if you're checking it out from Hoopla, you can get through the whole thing in a month because you have 10 borrows a month. But it is also available on DVD through the library. And that's all I have for this week, so I will pass it on to Sarah Marie.
Thank you, Sarah. So this week I was lucky enough to obtain an advanced reader copy, or an ARC, of the next book in Anthony Horowitz's Detective Susan Ryland mysteries, which is titled Moonflower Murders and publishes November 2020. I really enjoy most anything Anthony Horowitz publishes, and not just because he has the writing chops to prove himself. Horowitz not only has written 2 Sherlock Holmes novels in addition to his own series, but he has also written a 007 murder mystery novel, as well as contributed to television scripts along the lines of Agatha Christie's Poirot and Midsummer Murders. And perhaps my favorite of his credentials is Horowitz was also the creator and writer of Foyle's War, the television series that most of us are probably familiar with. So when I tell you that Horowitz's writing is delightful, his mystery plots are intricate but well resolved, and his characters feel very lived in, I'm not just saying words to say them. So in this novel, the sequel to the 2017 Magpie Murders, is another delight with the same writing as can be comfortably found in both Foyle's War and Midsummer Murders, but with higher stakes and an even more beautiful setting. In this series, retired publisher Susan Ryland is now managing a hotel on the beatific Greek island of Crete, in a town that is just an hour east of Heraklion. You don't necessarily need to have read the first book in the series, but in the previous novel, the last author that Susan had represented during her time as an editor, Alan Conway, was murdered, which is basically what you need to know. So in this novel, Susan is just starting to become restless with the stress of managing an aging hotel, with the pace of island life, for some reason, and with an increasing sense of homesickness for the London streets. And then the Tahirs come to stay. So after the new guests dropped the fact that their daughter, Cecily, was married in a Suffolk Coast hotel where a notorious murder took place. And then this murder, it just so happens to occur on the same day as the wedding. It also happens to be the same murder that Susan's late author, Alan Conway, based a mystery novel on, and Cecily read that book and is convinced that the wrong person was convicted of the real-life crime and is now missing. Now, you find out all of this within the first 2, maybe 3 chapters, so I haven't spoiled anything, but it is a great series and a great mystery. Like I said, the first book in this series was published in 2017, so there is a 3-year gap in publication, but Horowitz does have another series, the Hawthorne series, which is books deep in itself and begins with The Word is Murder, and is equally as excellent. Both of these series and Hawthorne's other novels are available on Hoopla and Libby as ebooks and e-audio, and we also have all of the books in the library itself. And now we will move on to William.
Thank you, Sarah Marie. My partner and I have spent the past few weeks listening to Happy, Why More or Less Everything is Absolutely Fine by Darren Brown. Brown is best known as a mentalist with multiple UK turned Netflix specials where he takes advantage of social programming and clever thinking to convince people to take part in extraordinary situations, including pushing a person off the edge of a building, taking a bullet for a total stranger, surviving a zombie pandemic. We actually saw him live a few years ago when he hopped across the pond to do his live show, The Secret, in its off-Broadway debut. Brown, during both his live show and all of his specials, makes it clear that nothing he's doing is actually magic. And he has the same sort of attitude in this book towards the self-help genre. Instead of making promises about how your life can improve with positive thinking or a secret trick that will bring you fortune, Brown suggests readers take a critical look at the way they frame the narrative of their life and set realistic expectations to achieve a true, long-lasting happiness. A warning. While it's not overly preachy, a lot of the information presented in the book ends up being Stoicism 101, which he freely admits to up front. So if you have no interest in that branch of philosophy or the history behind it, you may find Happy somewhat lacking. But overall, an interesting listen so far. Now, if you find yourself more interested in prestidigitation than philosophy, I would suggest instead Deceptive Practices, The Mysteries and Mentors of Ricky Jay, which we have both on DVD and available on Canopy. Jay, who passed away in 2018, was an occasional actor, amateur historian, and widely considered one of the best sleight of hand magicians ever. The documentary is a mixture of his personal history and the performers of yore that inspired him to perfect his craft. Being the type of performer who is always on, every single person who's interviewed during this has a story of Jay performing some sort of fantastical feat or another. One of my favorites is a gentleman who saw him perform a trick and then caught up with him later at a spa with Jay wearing nothing but a towel and saying, "Hey, could you do that trick again right now?" Yes, Jay does the trick again when the gentleman asks. Take a watch for that if you want to hear more stories with that intermixed with the history of stage magic in the world. And with that, I'll pass it along to Catherine.
Thank you, William. The book that I finished this week is called The Revisioners by Margaret Wilkerson Sexton. And this is a really engrossing novel whose theme, I would say, is the legacy of slavery in the United States. It's one of those novels where we get sort of split perspectives or different timelines with different characters. So we have Ava in the present day, or 2017, close enough to the present day. And then we have her great-great-grandmother, Josephine, at two different points in her life. One of those points is in the 1850s when she is a child who is enslaved. And then we see her also in 1924 when she's an old woman. So the book starts with Ava, who has lost her job, and she also wants to move her son to a new school. So what she does is she moves in with her white grandmother, Martha, to help take care of her in her old age. Martha is sort of, I guess we might say, slipping. She's showing the early signs of Alzheimer's or dementia and is also having some physical trouble taking care of herself. Ava's not the only one there, as Martha is very well off and also has a nurse and a cook. I wish we all did. So we move back and forth between the three time periods. I think that this is a good book for book clubs because there's a lot to talk about, and it's also not too long, which is often a problem with books that you would like to talk about people with, but nobody can get through them in a month. This one was a pretty short read despite all that happens in it. I actually wish that we did see more of Ava and what happens to her. I felt like there needed to be another 200 pages just to cover that. But maybe there will be a sequel. So I'm looking forward to that if there is one. And then I'm just briefly going to mention another audiobook that I finished, which is At Home by Bill Bryson. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I think so many people have already read it or already familiar with it. Bryson sort of does light narrative nonfiction or narrative history. He takes, in this book, his starting point from his house, and he sort of talks about the different parts of the house and just sort of goes from there. It's not just the history of parts of the house. I mean, he really kind of takes off, but his transitions are so smooth and he's very entertaining. And if you are taking a car trip this summer and looking for a good audiobook that has general appeal so that multiple members of your family can enjoy it, Bryson is always a good choice. But I will say he is always popular, so be sure to request it early if you want to download it or get it on CD. And from there, we will go to Lori.
Thanks, Catherine. This week, I have finished a book that I started reading. It's called No Surrender by Chris Edmonds, a father, a son, and an extraordinary act of heroism that continues to live on today. And it is nonfiction. It's actually a year old. He writes about his father, who he did not know this until many years after his father died, but during World War II, his father, who was in his early to mid-20s, was a sergeant during the Battle of Ardennes, right at the end of the war when everyone thought it was going to be over by Christmas, and then Hitler did like a last-ditch thing. His father and his unit were part of many American soldiers who were taken as POWs into Germany, and then were basically treated like concentration camp. You know, the Geneva Convention wasn't followed, or it was kind of scattershot followed. And one of the things that the Germans did was they kept saying, you know, all the Jews have to come out, all the Jewish American soldiers have to come stand out. They were obviously being taken away somewhere. And his father, because he was the sergeant, he was the highest ranking officer, and he told everyone that everyone was going to go out for roll call that morning, and not just the Jews. Everyone was going to say they were Jewish, and it was quite an act of defiance, and it saved many lives. And Chris Edmonds did not know this about his father at all. You know, like so many of us, we just think our parents were old always. And it's his story about how he discovers what his father had done. And he talks about how, you know, one person really can make a difference. Obviously, this is kind of extenuating circumstances, but in our lives, we often have opportunities where we can stand up and make a difference. So it's good. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. The other book I've just started reading is written by Sophie Hannah, who is a crime writer. This is nonfiction, though, and it is called How to Hold a Grudge. From Resentment to Contentment, the Power of Grudges to Transform Your Life. I don't often read self-help books, but this one kind of piqued my curiosity. I'm not very far into it, but she talks about so far about how grudges, you know, they have such a bad rap, but often they're very instructional. Like, maybe you really were wronged, you know, how do you avoid this in the future? That kind of thing. And then she moves on from here about different types of grudges, different examples. It's very entertaining, and I haven't found it to be totally transformative, but I'm not very far along yet. So maybe I'll get better at my grudge keeping. You guys will have to tell me if you notice an improvement. That's all I have to say. I'm going to pass it back to Sarah Marie.
Thank you, Lori. Well, that is it for us today, folks. As always, please remember we are all here for you. We are available for any comments, questions, or concerns that you may have, and you can reach us online through Facebook at facebook.com/HPLibrary, through our Twitter, which is @HPLibrary, or via email at hppla@hplibrary.org. We are also now here in person via reservation. You can learn more about this on our website, which is hplibrary.org. Our music today was Carefree by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more information about this and the titles we mentioned in our show notes below. Okay, everybody, this is us signing off. Until we see you next, stay safe.